Welcome to the Vegas Insider channel here on YouTube as we take a look at NFL Week 1. This is the Daily Insider. I am Kevin Rogers, and thank you for joining us here on Friday, September 10th, as we look ahead to the opening weekend in the NFL. We had a very exciting game last night with the Buccaneers outlasting the Cowboys 31-29, and we'll get to that game as well as some of the highlights for the weekend and some best bets coming up as well. And we are now joined by one of the top handicappers on VegasInsider.com, and looking forward to talking to him during football season. It is Paul Bovi who is joining us now. And Paul, it is good to see you again. I've not seen you in a while. And last night, very exciting finish. Looked like Tampa Bay was going to run away with that game. Dallas came back. Dak played well, but in the end, the Bucs won 31-29.
Kevin, it was vintage Tom Brady, but I have to tell you, I believe that was offensive pass interference, and I think the Bucs caught a huge break with that non-call. Dallas should have won the game. They played admirably. I think they showed that their offense this year is going to be formidable. Bucs looked a little suspect in the secondary. They had an injury early on. Dallas was able to expose it.
So Tampa Bay wins, they don't cover. And as far as your thoughts on Dallas and the way that Dak Prescott played?
He played great, and I got to give him a lot of credit. He's got a lot to live up to with that contract. Last year, he went out after a few games. He had an offensive line in front of him. Andy Dalton, unfortunately, did not. There were a lot of injuries last year to that Dallas pass protection unit, and anyway, he got what he needed last night. There were a couple poor throws, an INT. There was a near INT. I believe it was late in the first half. But the numbers were good. But I think Dak has to rein in those potential mistakes for Dallas to go a long way this year.
So Tampa Bay now 1-0 on the season, and Dallas, look, I don't think they're really in trouble. It's the NFC East, so they got a long way to go this season. Now let's take a look at Sunday's card, Paul, and we're going to begin in the AFC East. One of the late games, the Dolphins and the Patriots in Foxborough. Battle of Alabama quarterbacks, Mac Jones making his first start, and Tua Tagovailoa, his second season with the Dolphins. And Bill Belichick's got a lot of faith in Mac Jones. He got rid of Cam Newton. We know Cam that he looked like he had lost a step. The vaccination stuff also probably played a little part into it. But what do you think about this matchup with New England as a short favorite against Miami and Foxborough?
Well, very interesting matchup because you have two quarterbacks, one of which has limited experience and the other one has no NFL experience. And this looks like a game that's going to be dominated by the defenses. Tua last year, 290 passes, 186 completions, but 6.3 yards an attempt. And he had 356 in the closeout game against the Bills in a blowout, and then 300 plus against the Chiefs. So he does not throw the ball downfield. He had 3 contests in which he totaled less than 100 yards. And they have, Miami does, as you know, one of the worst offensive lines in the league. Kinley is an absolute nightmare. Austin Jackson, who may sit out this week and be replaced by a third-year player who came in from the Panthers, was also one of the worst in the league. This is a D-rated offensive line protecting a very inexperienced quarterback. And I refuse to believe that Bill Belichick is going to let him slice up his defense. Now, on the other side, you have Mac Jones, who they have very little tape on at this point. They can look back and see what he did at Alabama, but that's limited. And I think that Miami will probably put a lot of pressure on him, a lot of different defenses, a lot of different looks. This is a game that I would give an edge to New England on, but I also think it's going to be a defensive struggle, and New England gets the best of it.
And last year when these teams met, New England won the opener 21-11, and that was Ryan Fitzpatrick and Cam Newton. So Tua's never played up at Gillette Stadium, so it should be interesting. The Dolphins did beat the Patriots in Miami in their late season meeting. But again, playing in New England has always been tough for the Dolphins. Now let's take a look.
Kevin, they also bring in, New England does, Matthew Judon, Jalen Mills, and also Kyle Van Noy. So they strengthen that stop unit. And I think Bill Belichick, he was exposed last year as what some might call a mediocre coach without Tom Brady. And there's been some talk in the press by some former players. I think Asante Samuel made a few had a few choice words this week. So I think he's really going to mortgage his future in terms of having the New England Patriots put together a very successful year. He's going to do whatever he has to do this year in light of the circumstances with Tom Brady. And I think you're going to see a commendable performance by the New England Patriots this year, starting with this week.
Now, one of the other late games on Sunday, Paul, the Browns and the Chiefs. It's a rematch of that AFC divisional matchup at Arrowhead Stadium. Patrick Mahomes got hurt in that game, and Kansas City ended up winning. And we know the Browns have had struggles in opening day since their return to the NFL. And granted, it's a little unfair because some of those teams were pretty bad, but obviously they're way improved. They won a wild card game last year, and this is the team that people thought would be a contender 2 years ago, and they failed miserably. And last year they finally stepped up. They still have a ways to go. But the Chiefs here, short favorite, Super Bowl losers, normally don't fare well in week one. What are your thoughts on this matchup between the Chiefs and the Browns?
Well, if you look at past history, it's hard to make a case for the Cleveland Browns since they have not won an opening game in, I believe, 16 years. And only once in 21 years since they relocated. But if you look at this team and you go down the list, Jarvis Landry, Austin Hooper, Beckham is back. He was knocked out in Game 7 last year. And then you got the running game in Hunt and Chubb, and you got Baker Mayfield, the second year of the Shanahan system, and a very highly rated offensive line, perhaps the best in the league. All 5 starters return. I think they have the edge on offense. As much as the Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes, as we saw last year in the Super Bowl, cannot do it on his own. And the Chiefs bring in an entirely new offensive line. 3 of those players have never played a snap in the NFL. So there's 2 rookies on there. They did bring in Orlando Brown from Baltimore, which is certainly a plus. But I have to feel the Browns have an edge. Now, the Browns, Cleveland does have 9 new faces on defense. They did bring in Clowney, so they might take a little time to gel. But overall, I think Cleveland has the edge here. And if you look at Kansas City on defense last year, they were not great. They won several games by the skin of their teeth. So if you look at past history, you make a case for Kansas City. But if you look at the 2 teams, I think the Browns have an edge, and you're catching 5.5 to 6 points. So, of course, Arrowhead is got to be worth a field goal, and it's an intimidating environment. But I think once they overcome the surroundings, the Browns will stay in this game and may pull out a win.
Now, taking a look, Paul, at some of the early games on Sunday, the Browns' big rival, the Bengals, they are at home facing the Vikings. And Joe Burrow, now his second season as the quarterback of the Bengals, he had that ACL tear at Washington last year. They draft Jamar Chase out of LSU, his teammate, who struggled to catch passes in the preseason. There's still some weapons in the Bengals. And Minnesota, it feels like, on the other side, Paul, that a lot of people are really slamming them right now. They still have a lot of weapons offensively. They have Dalvin Cook, one of the top running backs in the league. Justin Jefferson had a great year, and we'll see what Kirk Cousins does. But the Vikings here are a short favorite at Cincinnati to open the season.
Well, Dalvin Cook, you mentioned him, 5.0 yards per carry last year, 166 receptions the last 3 years. Definitely one of the top running backs now. He's combined to play 28 games the last 2 years. And, of course, there's questions with respect to Kirk Cousins. Adam Thielen is 31 years old, and he's had some injury issues come up the last couple of years. So the Vikings on offense look pretty good. Now, I think they're going to get a lot of improvement on defense. They had 4 players out last year, 2 of which opted out for COVID, and they were major difference makers. Then you had Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks out with injuries. In fact, key losses last year accounted for a lot of the Vikings' demise defensively. Now, if you look at Zimmer's record, for whatever reason, in odd years, 33-14, and even years, he's hovering around 500. And here we are in 2021, and the Vikings not only getting back those players, they bring in Breland, Patrick Peterson in the secondary, as well as Xavier Woods. If the Vikings stay healthy on defense, they're going to be one of the best in the NFC. And if they get that offense going and Dalvin Cook stays healthy, they're going to be able to move the football. Now, on the other side, if you look at Cincinnati, and you mentioned this, yeah, they bring in Chase. They've got T. Higgins. They're going to have one of the top receiving cores in the AFC. And the only question is, can Joe Burrow get the protection that he needs to thrive? Because last year he was under duress for most of the year. And of course, it resulted in that devastating injury. They did draft a couple offensive linemen. It remains to be seen if they're going to get productivity. But this should be an interesting game. Vikings, Cincinnati. And I'm going to just comment and say it should be a close one.
And Minnesota, a short favorite, and we know they had a lot of close games last year going both ways. And for the Bengals, we'll see. Look, we know Cincinnati is the 4th best team in their division. We'll see if they can make any kind of move going into this season. Now, as far as another interconference matchup, Paul, you have the Chargers and the football team in D.C., and the Chargers open up as a 1-point favorite. Washington now a short favorite at most books, and we'll see what Justin Herbert does in his second season. Now, we've talked about, Paul, Tua. We talked about Burrow. Now Justin Herbert, who was the Offensive Player of the Year last year in the NFL, Offensive Rookie, I should say, of the Year last year in the NFL. But now let's see what he can do against a Washington defense. It's pretty good. Maybe not great offensively, but we'll see what the football team can do. Here's a short favorite.
So Herbert did not take a snap in the preseason, and I'm not sure that's the best strategy. He's still coming off a rookie season. Now they have tape on him, and I'm not sold on that. Austin Eckler did not practice on Thursday, and that would be a loss for the Chargers. They do have some capable receivers, but this Washington team is a very interesting work in progress, because last year they had the worst passer rating in the entire NFC, and they somehow managed to get to the playoffs and almost knock off the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who of course went on to win the Super Bowl. They have 2 capable running backs, Gibson and McKissick. They now have Ryan Fitzpatrick, and I'm looking actually for the Redskins to do some great things this year. They have a very interesting schedule in that all their division games come at the end of the year. It's not the easiest schedule. Last year, they were the beneficiary of some injuries and a favorable schedule in which they took on some really lower tier NFL quarterbacks. And this year, they're going to take on guys like Josh Allen and Tom Brady. So it's going to be an interesting situation for Washington in this game. You could see some points because LA did lose some defensive players. They lost Perriman amongst 3 or 4, as well as a cornerback. And I think you could see some points, but then I would possibly be apprehensive about playing it over here, or I would be apprehensive because Justin Herbert hasn't seen any time in the preseason, and I just don't think that was the right move, but maybe I'll be proven wrong.
And we'll see what happens with the Chargers going east in week 1. And, Washington last year, we look at some of the quarterbacks that they beat, Paul. They didn't have to face Dak. They beat Andy Dalton twice. They beat Nick Mullins when he was the quarterback of the 49ers at a neutral site game out in Arizona. They beat Joe Burrow in the game he tore his ACL. So, I mean, not going to say Herbert's elite, but Herbert a little better than some of the quarterbacks that they beat. So we'll see how that turns out. Now, I want your thoughts, Paul, on one college game that you pointed out to me that you really like, and we'll see what Army can do this week. They had a big win last week over Georgia State, and Army takes on Western Kentucky this week.
Yeah, Kevin, this game was a stick out to me. I haven't even gotten through the whole card yet, but Army last week looked great against Georgia State. I believe the final score was 43-10. And if you look at Western Kentucky, I believe they lose some key starters on offense. Now, last week, I believe they beat UT Martin 56-21. If that wasn't the final, it was very close. But when you look at Martin, they ran for, I don't have the stats in front of me, but it was over 200 yards. But the quarterback ran 12 times for 44 yards. And I believe if you subtract that out, they still ran for 5 yards a carry, Martin did. And this plays right into Army's strength. As you know, Army runs the football. Now, they used 3 quarterbacks last week. They did not need to throw. But these guys, I watched them. When they did throw, they were effective. I don't see Western Kentucky staying in the game with this Army team, which I believe is going to be a force. We've seen them in the last few years, and they've been a pretty dynamic team, and they've gotten some key wins over their over the service academies, and they've been competitive. And I just don't think Western Kentucky can stay with Army and trade points, and Army's going to control the football, throw when necessary, put up 35 points, and win this football game probably by 14.
Paul Bovi, always a great insight from him, looking at the NFL and college football. And Paul, we appreciate the time. We can find Paul's picks on VegasInsider.com. And Paul, we'll talk to you again soon and bring you back on the Daily Insider. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
And Paul Bovi, who he really has got a good pulse on the NFL and college football. And he doesn't do the trend thing or a lot of people will look at different types of things, ways to handicap any sport. And I always believed in, take a little of this, take a little bit of that. And Paul doesn't really go to that. He goes to, as far as the trends, he goes to the just straight up looks at the personnel and, who's in, who's out, and really goes in that direction and does a great job with that. So you can check out Paul's picks at VegasInsider.com. We had him a lot on the Bet and Collect podcast last year. And Paul, he's really great with totals in the NFL as well. So check out Paul's work at VegasInsider.com. Now let's take a look at the NFL card for this weekend. And the first game we're going to look at, the Steelers and the Bills. They meet up in Buffalo. And when you look at what Buffalo has done the last few seasons against Pittsburgh, it's kind of interesting that the Bills have actually beaten the Steelers twice in the last 2 seasons, both as either a short underdog, which was 2 years ago, as a Sunday night flex game at Heinz Field, 17-10. Then last year, 26-15 in Buffalo as a 2-point favorite, both December games. Now they meet up in September in Buffalo, and last year's total 48.5, this year's total 48.5 as well. And Pittsburgh's offense hasn't done much against Buffalo, but this line jumping up to 6.5 with the Bills laying that against the Steelers. We all remember what happened to Pittsburgh last year, starting 11-0, and they fell apart towards the end of the season. And then eventually they lost in the wild card round to Cleveland while Buffalo got to the AFC Championship game. And the Bills, very talented with Josh Allen, who signed that big extension over the offseason. Buffalo, they reclaimed their home field advantage, which I think was lost probably for a little bit there. But, definitely a lot of points for the Bills to lay against the Steelers, a team that Pittsburgh has lost to each of the last 2 years. And also Mike Tomlin has been a very good underdog throughout his career. Now, the Jets face the Panthers in Carolina, and it's the Sam Darnold Bowl as he sees his former team for the first time with his new team. So Darnold, who was drafted by the Jets a few years ago, didn't work out in New York. He goes to Carolina, and the schedule makers obviously want to showcase that one right out of the gate. And Carolina going into their second season with Matt Rule as the head coach, and they had Teddy Bridgewater last year running the show. Christian McCaffrey, one of the top offensive weapons in the league. He had some injuries, but Carolina, though, still stuck in the same division as the Super Bowl champion Buccaneers, the Saints, who are going to be very competitive. We don't know what Atlanta's going to be. Carolina started 3-2 last year and only won 2 games the rest of the season. But the Panthers, though, it'll be curious to see if the change of scenery for Sam Darnold will make a difference or not. And on the flip side, Zach Wilson makes his Jets debut, and Robert Saleh, the new head coach of New York. So a new head coach, a new quarterback, and the Jets, early on, it won't be easy traveling to Carolina, getting New England at home, then at Denver, and then Tennessee at home. So very important game for the Jets to get started with a victory here, but this number has dropped a bit. It got up to 5 earlier in the week. Now it's down to 4. But Carolina wasn't a great home favorite last year, and the Jets, look, getting Adam Gase out of there, getting Sam Darnold out of there can only be a positive because they really weren't good with both of them there. Now, another new coach, new quarterback duo in Jacksonville as the Jags take on the Texans. Trevor Lawrence makes his regular season debut. Urban Meyer makes his debut in the NFL after his successful stints with Florida and with Ohio State. And you don't normally see a team with the number 1 pick in the draft being favored on the road to start the season. But that's the case because Deshaun Watson's not playing for Houston. And it's going to be Tyrod Taylor, who spent last season with the Chargers, and he suffered that punctured lung via the team doctor. And then Justin Herbert came in and replaced Taylor, and then Taylor never saw the field again for LA. So now he's in Houston trying to save this Texan team with a new head coach as well. And they ended last year with 5 straight defeats. Houston was pretty much a disaster. People think they'll be the worst team in football this year. And Jacksonville, they started 1-0 last year after beating Indianapolis in the opener. Remember, they shocked them at home, and then after that, they couldn't win a game the rest of the year. But the Jags, they hope that Trevor Lawrence is the answer. And last year, Jacksonville, they obviously lost twice to Houston because they went 1-15. But in both the losses, they allowed 57 points. But again, you're not facing Deshaun Watson this year. Last year, Jacksonville, their only favorite opportunity, they lost at home to the Dolphins. So a lot of uncertainty here with new quarterback play, new coaches in this Jacksonville-Houston matchup. Arizona and Tennessee, they hook up at Nissan Stadium in Nashville. And look, the Cardinals under Cliff Kingsbury, they've been a good road underdog, or actually underdog in general. 7-3-2 against the spread their last 12 when getting points. So the Cardinals have caught some people by storm, and now they're only getting 3 against Tennessee, and a Titans team that's been to the playoffs each of the last 2 years. But for Arizona, now we'll see if they could make that turn. And again, the most difficult division in football when you're looking at 3 teams that have made the Super Bowl in the last 8 years: Seattle, LA, and San Francisco. But Arizona last year, remember, they won at San Francisco in the opener. So they're definitely not afraid of playing any of these big teams. They had 11 unders last year, the Cardinals. And they started off the season with 6 consecutive unders. So the Cardinals going to Tennessee, where the Titans lost their wild card game to Baltimore, but a team that can score a bunch of points. They were a good over team last year, and they're going to run the ball with Derrick Henry. They now have Julio Jones in there, another weapon for Ryan Tannehill. But I think this line's a little short, though, between Arizona and Tennessee. I don't know why it's not a little bit bigger. Arizona could be a lean here in this game. The Chargers and the football team of Washington. We mentioned this with Paul Bovi, talked with him about it a little bit ago. But this matchup between the Chargers and the football team in D.C., I've been going back and forth regarding this matchup between these two teams. And first of all, with L.A., they blew a lot of games last year. They also won a lot of close games. They blew a 17-point lead at Tampa Bay. They blew a double-digit lead against New Orleans. They blew a big lead against Denver on the road. And they also did win a game late in the year against Atlanta. They did beat the Broncos late in the year. They beat the Raiders late in the year. They had a game against the Raiders that they had to drop pass at the end in the final minute. So the Chargers, look, Justin Herbert had them competitive. And I know they lost the game 45-0 to New England also. But they were in a lot of these games. They lost to the Chiefs in overtime as well. When you look at Washington, very good defensively, but still a 7-9 team that overcame a 17-0 deficit at Philadelphia in the opener, that also overcame a 14-0 deficit at Pittsburgh late in the season. They beat San Francisco without Garoppolo. They beat Dallas without Dak twice. They beat the Giants. And we know that Daniel Jones isn't that great of a quarterback. So I just don't know where Washington beat a lot of good teams last year. That's what I question with them going into this game against the Chargers on Sunday. The Eagles face the Falcons in Atlanta. And I flipped on this one because I thought that Philadelphia would be the play, originally getting 3. This number's up to 3.5 now. And I've looked at Atlanta. They have not been good in Atlanta's not been good in season openers. But the one thing I've noticed with them is in the games they've lost in season openers over the last 8 to 10 years, the teams they have lost to eventually went to the playoffs or had winning records. The teams they beat ended up having losing records or missing the playoffs. So chances are Philadelphia is more in the latter, that they're going to miss the playoffs. I don't think Philadelphia is going to be in the postseason with Jalen Hurts, and unless Gardner Minshew does something this year for Philadelphia. But the Falcons did sit a lot of their main players during the preseason, which has been a point of contention a little bit, saying, okay, these guys are out. How is it going to translate when they play in the regular season? But Atlanta still has a better quarterback in Matt Ryan. They have Calvin Ridley. They have Kyle Pitts, the tight end out of Florida. There are pieces there in that Falcons offense where Philadelphia offensively, I don't know how much faith I have in them. I do like Atlanta more than Philadelphia in this game, even though they're laying the short number. Atlanta's not been a great home team. For some reason, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, they haven't played well in. But I think that in this situation where they're facing a young quarterback in Jalen Hurts, who really didn't have great numbers last year, that Atlanta could be worth a look in that one. The Seahawks faced the Colts in Indianapolis, and the Colts were a short favorite against the Seahawks before this line flipped. T.Y. Hilton likely out. Now Carson Wentz is going to play for Indianapolis in this game. A couple notes here. Seattle was 1-5 against the spread last year as a road favorite. Also, Indianapolis was not a home underdog at all last year with Phillip Rivers as quarterback. Now, Rivers is retired. He's coaching high school football in Alabama. But Frank Reich has not been a home underdog that often as head coach of the Colts. So now you're getting 3 points in this game, and I think people are a little too down on the Colts here. Seattle, not a great team defensively from the passing standpoint. And we don't know what Carson Wentz has left in the tank. I think we're all kind of bailing on him a little bit, but Indianapolis still not an easy place to play. Seattle started last season in Atlanta as a short dog. Now they're favored here against the Colts, and I think Indianapolis is a better team than Atlanta. But Seattle here, a short favorite against Indianapolis. Now, another road favorite in interconference play, the Vikings and the Bengals in Cincinnati. And I do lean towards Minnesota here. We'll give out some best bets a little bit later on. But I do lean towards Minnesota in this spot against Cincinnati for a couple reasons. One, Minnesota, they have a quarterback in Kirk Cousins who plays well against bad teams. And the Bengals, they'll get better eventually. They have the pieces. They have a franchise quarterback in Joe Burrow. But I just think that Minnesota, the pieces they have are better than Cincinnati's pieces. And even though the Vikings went 0-3 in the preseason, they really didn't show much. You got to throw the preseason stuff out. The Vikings last year won at Houston. They beat Green Bay, which is probably their best victory. But also, they knocked off Detroit twice. They beat Chicago on the road. They beat Carolina by 1. They beat Jacksonville by 3 in overtime. And they went 0-7 against the spread to close out the season. But they're also facing a Bengals team. Yeah, they knocked off Pittsburgh as a heavy underdog. Besides that, what Cincinnati did, and you can throw out the second half of the year because Joe Burrow didn't play after that Washington game, which was about halfway through the season last year, that Cincinnati, they beat Jacksonville, who was 1-15. They tied the Eagles, who weren't very good. They had a nice home win over Tennessee. They had 2 good home wins over Tennessee and Pittsburgh, but they were getting 7.5 against Tennessee and 14.5 against Pittsburgh. Now you're getting a field goal against a Minnesota team that could score 28. I wouldn't be surprised by that. This one I'm staying away from, but San Francisco goes to Detroit, and it's a bit of a dicey spot, I think, for the 49ers. Detroit, as a new head coach in Dan Campbell, they have a new quarterback, even though he's not a rookie, but they have a new quarterback in Jared Goff, who came over in the Matthew Stafford trade. And San Francisco, they're up to 8 right now over Detroit. And they had a bad season last year due to a lot of injuries. Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt early. They had to go to Nick Mullins, which is obviously a downgrade. But Detroit, though, they've actually been pretty competitive as a team to back in week 1. Last year they blew that Chicago game late. They were up big, and again, they were favored in that one. So I like to break it up from favorite to underdog. But, last few years, this team has been a favorite in week 1, which is so interesting with Detroit. They had that tie against Arizona. And those 2 games against Arizona and Chicago, they were up big and they couldn't hold it. But to think that the Lions, who have not been a great franchise, the last time they were an underdog, think about this. Last time the Lions were an underdog in week 1 was 2017, and they have not been good in a few years, and they beat Arizona 35-23. So now it's a new era. Jared Goff, he's seen the 49ers before as a member of the Rams. I don't want to take Detroit in this spot. I just don't know how you lay 8 with San Francisco. I really don't. Now let's look at some of the later games in the NFL. Dolphins and the Patriots. And Miami, they've not had a lot of good luck in New England over the years. Pretty much the only highlight was that Wildcat game with Ronnie Brown back in 2008, the year that Tom Brady tore his ACL. That was the only year the Dolphins could win the division because Tom Brady wasn't in New England. He was out. Matt Castle was the quarterback. But when you go back through the years as far as the Dolphins in New England, remember they won a few years ago with Ryan Fitzpatrick. They were 17.5-point dogs, winning 27-24. But normally the Dolphins have gone to New England and they've not fared well. And they lost last year 21-11 in the opener. They won 22-12 in the rematch in Miami. Both games easily stayed under the total. And this total is at 43.5. And with Mac Jones, it's just hard to unequivocally say that he is better than Tua on this level when he hasn't played a game yet. Now, Tua still has a ways to go, but the Dolphins played well with Tua as their starting quarterback last year. They went 7-3 in his last 10 starts. And they're a short dog here against the Patriots. Flores is a Belichick guy, Belichick disciple. So nothing new here for Flores to see Belichick. But I think Miami hangs in this game. I really do. And look, if Mac Jones ends up throwing for 350 yards, so be it. But he still has not taken a snap yet on this level in a regular season game. The Browns and the Chiefs meet in Kansas City. And Super Bowl losers have struggled over the years in game 1. Revenge spot for the Browns after they lost to the Chiefs last year in the divisional round, 22-17 as 7.5-point dogs. They covered in both their underdog opportunities in the playoffs. Remember, they jumped out to that big lead over Pittsburgh, and they beat the Steelers in the wild card round last year. And now the Browns get the Chiefs here. Look, Kansas City plays Cleveland and then Baltimore, who's had some injury issues recently. They have a tough start, the Chiefs. But even as an underdog last year for the Cleveland Browns, covered against Kansas City in the second round, beat Pittsburgh outright. They lost that wild Monday night game to Baltimore, 47-42, getting 3. They won at Tennessee, getting 4. They only had really one blowout loss, or I guess 2, to Pittsburgh and Baltimore on the road. And also they won at Dallas, and that was when Dak was still there. So Cleveland has seen success as an underdog more so than not. And the Chiefs, look, the pressure's on them because the window could be closing. I know it sounds nuts, but they've been to back-to-back Super Bowls. It's hard to make that second Super Bowl in a row. We've seen that over the years. That's very difficult. And they were blown out by Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl last year. We know what the home field advantage is for the Chiefs. But also, the schedule wasn't particularly tough last year for Kansas City. I mean, you look at some of the teams they beat at home: Houston, New England. They lost to Las Vegas. The Jets they beat. They barely beat Carolina. They barely beat Denver. Atlanta they won by 3. The Chargers they lost to. So really, they didn't have a lot of competition necessarily at home. They did win at New Orleans and win at Tampa Bay in the regular season, and also won at Buffalo. Then they did beat Buffalo and Cleveland in the playoffs. But in the regular season, there were some high numbers that they didn't cover. I really don't like this game on Sunday between these two. The Broncos and the Giants at MetLife Stadium. And now Teddy Bridgewater is the quarterback of the Broncos. The Broncos now laying 3, which I know Denver's good defensively. The Giants really aren't great, and they do get Saquon Barkley back after he missed pretty much all of last year with the torn ACL. He suffered in week 2 at Chicago. But Teddy Bridgewater's always talked about as a great quarterback as an underdog, but here he's favored against the Giants. And New York last year, they were kind of an odd team because, even though Daniel Jones maybe isn't going to be a franchise-changing quarterback for the New York Giants, they still went 6-10 last year. They were hanging around the division race. I mean, when you're division champion, won 7 games, only finished a game out. They had that bad start, but at least early on when you see who the Giants played, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Rams, all playoff teams. San Francisco was in the Super Bowl the year before, and they had all those injuries. Dallas with Dak, they beat Washington, but then lost to Tampa Bay on that Monday night. They lost to Arizona, who was going to be in the playoffs, or at least on the fringe of it. Cleveland, Baltimore. Giants had a tough schedule last year. And I know some of the teams they beat, I mean, the best win was against Seattle on the road. It was a really good win, getting 11. But the Giants faced pretty good competition last year. And now they're getting 3. I don't know if I'm ready to lay points with Teddy Bridgewater on the road. That is one thing I'm definitely not sold on. The Packers and the Saints, this game was originally scheduled for the Superdome in New Orleans, but Hurricane Ida knocked these teams out of New Orleans. They'll be playing in Jacksonville on Sunday for a late kickoff. And, the Saints lose the home field, which kind of stinks for them. And now let's see what Aaron Rodgers has in likely his final year with the Packers. That's what it feels like. And Green Bay, they did beat New Orleans last year, getting 3.5 at the Superdome, 37-20 or 37-30. And that game easily went over the total of 52. But there's no Drew Brees on the New Orleans side anymore. And now he's retired. Aaron Rodgers had 3 touchdown passes in that game. Drew Brees had 3 touchdown passes in that game. But now it's Jameis Winston who's going to start for the Saints. And, always tough with the neutral site game just because now New Orleans loses the home field advantage. And Green Bay is used to playing outside more so than New Orleans is. I mean, Packers are lean here. I don't love it just because of that home field advantage being gone. But the Packers we know they're on the doorstep of the Super Bowl last year, and we'll just see if they can get back there or get over the hump this year. The next game, the Bears and the Rams, that's the Sunday night affair in LA. And it's just very hard to make a case for the Bears here. The Rams a 7.5-point favorite. Chicago was 8-8. They were a playoff team last year. They were bounced by New Orleans in the opening round at the Superdome. Chicago was 0-4 straight up and against the spread last year as an underdog of 6 points or more, 3 losses by double digits. Now, 7 of their 8 wins last season came against non-playoff teams. The only win they had against a playoff team was against Tampa Bay on that Thursday night. Remember at Soldier Field in September? And it was a 1-point game. Bears ended up winning. That was the famous Tom Brady didn't know what down it was, but Tom had the last laugh in the end because the Bucs won the Super Bowl. But now that Mitchell Trubisky's gone, they drafted Justin Fields out of Ohio State, but Andy Dalton, though, is going to start this opener for Chicago. Fields will eventually get in. I have absolutely no faith in Andy Dalton to get Chicago past LA here. Rams, one of the top defenses in the NFL. The Rams have Matthew Stafford now. We'll see how Stafford responds. He hasn't played in the preseason, but I cannot make a case for Chicago in this game. The final game of week 1, Ravens and the Raiders in Las Vegas at Allegiant Stadium. And Baltimore, they have had a myriad of injuries of late. And right now they're laying 4, total of 50 and a half. And Baltimore lost Marcus Peters to injury, torn ACL. Their defensive back, they lost Gus Edwards. Their running back to a torn ACL. Kind of just all happened at once for the Ravens, which was terrible luck. But at the same time, the Ravens got to move on and see what happens. They go to Vegas. First time they're playing in front of a crowd, the Raiders are, at Allegiant Stadium. They went to that empty stadium last year. Gorgeous stadium in Vegas, but nobody was there. They won that opener against the Saints on that Monday night. Now they get the Ravens on a Monday night, and we'll see what Lamar Jackson can do for Baltimore this year to carry this offense. And for John Gruden back with the Raiders once again, look, he signed to that big deal. The Raiders up and down again last year. Feels like that's what they always are. They're going to be competitive. They're going to hang, but they're never going to win that AFC West. So that's a look at the NFL for week 1. And now it's time for some best bets in the NFL. And these are my 2 best bets for the week. The Vikings and the Colts. And first with Minnesota, they're laying 3 at Cincinnati. I just think this is a perfect Kirk Cousins game for him to face a team like Cincinnati that Minnesota should beat. We know Cousins isn't good in prime time. It isn't good against teams with winning records. This game is not in prime time, and they're playing a team that, granted, is 0-0, but a team that was in last place last year in their division. So Minnesota laying a short amount. I don't think it's asking too much for them to win at Cincinnati. And Indianapolis getting 3 against Seattle at home. I just feel like a lot of people are down on the Colts. And Carson Wentz, he injured that, his foot in the preseason. He's back now. Wentz, you say, is a drop-off from Phillip Rivers. He was really good at one time. He had that ACL tear. And I don't know if the ACL tear in Philadelphia just totally set him back because the numbers weren't the same. But Wentz is still a decent quarterback. Let's just see if he can bounce back now. Seattle not great on the pass defense. And for the Colts, who weren't a home underdog last year, now you're getting 3 points with them. And Seattle had their struggles on the road. And Seattle's not great in week 1 games normally under Pete Carroll. I'm going to take the points with the Colts. So my best bets for week 1, the Vikings and the Colts for this week. So that's what we have for week 1 in the NFL. And my thanks to Paul Bovi for joining us here on the live stream on the Daily Insider. Always a great job from Paul. And we'll have a full recap coming up on Monday from the college and the NFL cards, which should be very interesting this weekend. I am Kevin Rogers. Thank you so much for watching this edition of the Daily Insider. In case you missed any of it, you can always catch my interview with Paul and also the Bet and Collect podcast as well. You can find that on VegasInsider.com. In case you missed anything from today, you can find it on there. And you can find it also on our YouTube channel at Vegas Insider. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks a lot for watching the Daily Insider. And as always, best of luck with your bets.